This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're going to continue with Matthew Alexander, who's written the book, How to Break a Terrorist. We're also joined by Scott Horton, an attorney who specializes in international law and human rights, who's written extensively about prisoner abuse in Iraq. He's the legal affairs contributor to Harpers magazine and writes the blog No Comment. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Scott Horton. As you listen to Matthew Alexander lay out his story, it's certainly a different approach than we've gotten out of many of the interrogations at Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and other places.
Well, this is obviously a very important book and an important account for many reasons. I think, one, it really demonstrates the integrity and the effectiveness of traditional American military values and techniques. It shows that they work and they harvest results. The pinpointing of Zarqawi was certainly one of the 2 or 3 most important intelligence breakthroughs in the course of this entire war effort. So that's, I think, a very, very striking point. But second, our discussion about torture and the introduction of torture to date has really focused on events that happened at Abu Ghraib, things that happened at Guantanamo, a prominent memorandum signed by the Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld, early on. But I understood instantly when I heard his account about the pushback he got from the Department of Defense why. And that's because his account breaks extremely important new ground. It shows us that there is an entire another channel in which torture developed, and that's inside of the Special Operations Command. And by the information I've collected, which I think this account confirms, that goes back to the beginning of the conflict, 2002. Special Operations Command set up, operated essentially as a personal fiefdom by Dr. Stephen Cambone, who was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And Dr. Cambone was authorizing taking the gloves off, using brutal methods, using torture, and that happened way before the Justice Department got involved. Memoranda were written and everything else. Now, why is that significant? This timeline is very, very important because it shows that the use of torture and torture techniques comes much earlier than the crafting of the torture memoranda and the Justice Department, the approval process. And that then shows in turn that these memoranda were written after the fact in an effort to protect people who had already engaged and implemented this policy. So this is a bombshell, in fact.
Matthew Alexander, did you see memoranda? Did you see memos posted about what you could do?
Yes. I mean, there was some confusion amongst all interrogators at some point about what was allowed and not allowed, because at one point what was allowed in Guantanamo Bay was not allowed in Iraq. And I had interrogators on my team who had come from Guantanamo Bay. And things that they were allowed or not allowed to do there were allowed or not allowed in Iraq. And
for example, dogs?
Dogs were not allowed. I know they were allowed at one point at Guantanamo Bay, but by the time I arrived in Iraq in early 2006, dogs were definitely outlawed. But let me give you another example, good cop, bad cop, which is, it's a technique that we use all the time in the criminal investigative world. It's an effective technique. But it wasn't allowed in Iraq for a long time, although it was allowed as an enhanced interrogation technique in Guantanamo Bay.
Why wasn't it allowed in Iraq? Because they didn't want the good cop?
You know, I've never gotten a good explanation about why we weren't allowed to use good cop, bad cop. If it's torture, then why do we use it in criminal interrogations? It's not. And I think it more has to do with the fact that there wasn't a uniform policy from the beginning for all interrogators that applied across all theaters, which there should have been.
Scott Horton, your latest piece in Harpers magazine, Justice After Bush, Prosecuting an Outlaw Administration. You think President Bush on down should be prosecuted?
Well, I think we have to start with a proper investigation before we reach conclusions about who should be prosecuted and for what crimes. I think there's simply no question but that serious criminal conduct occurred. And in fact, we've had prosecutions already. I mean, we can count 17 NCOs, so it's grunts at the bottom of the military food chain who have been prosecuted for this abuse. There has been no accountability, however, for those who made policy. And I think as a matter of of proper administration of criminal justice, it's the policymakers who should most be held to account. So the first step is to establish all the facts and establish them carefully and calmly. Who took what decisions when? Security classifications have been wielded very effectively to obscure much of what went on. I think, Matthew's statements make that clear, and the redactions in his book make that clear. In particular, we know these things were going on inside the Special Operations Command, and security classifications were used to keep that entire tale secret, even secret from congressional oversight committees that attempted to probe into it. So the answer here, I think, is for President-elect Obama to appoint a presidential commission of inquiry like the Rockefeller Commission, or a hybrid presidential.
What's the Rockefeller Commission?
The Rockefeller Commission was appointed to look into criminal conduct within the CIA in 1975, the same things that the Church Committee was looking into. Or something like the 9/11 Commission, which is a hybrid congressional presidential commission, and fill it with eminent persons, give it a clear mandate, and let them get to the bottom of the facts. When the facts are established, and that's a process that I'm convinced would take a couple of years, then we can deal with the question of prosecutions.
Scott Horton, has any U.S. official ever been prosecuted for torture?
We've had military officers who've been prosecuted for torture twice, in 1903 and in 1968. Both of those cases involved waterboarding. And we had camp commanders during the Korean conflict who were court-martialed and punished for abuse of detainees. So the answer is yes. But higher-level policymakers, no. But senior military officials, yes.
Now, Obama officials, advisors to Obama, have said that he is unlikely to go after anyone involved in authorizing or carrying out interrogations. And then there's the question of President Bush, whether he would issue any kind of preemptive pardons.
Well, that's an AP report, and the AP report relies on two sources, and I believe one of those sources is John O. Brennan, who was the chief of staff to Mr. Tenet, who would, of course, be a target of such an investigation, so it's easy to understand why he would say Obama won't do it. I'm told.
And of course, he is head of the transition team on intelligence, but has taken himself out of the running.
I think that's correct, and I'm told by the Obama transition team that no decision has been taken on this issue, nor is there any particular rush or need to take a decision before January 20th. In fact, I think there's an important piece they're waiting to see play out, and that is whether President Bush is going to issue a preemptive class-based pardon. And I think there's a lot of speculation he'll do it. The president, before he leaves office, may very well, and if he does it, I think it'll be on his last day on the way out, issue a pardon to all of those who were involved in the formation and implementation of his enhanced interrogation program, what he refers to affectionately as my program.
Now, this is from Reuters. It says that ex-generals will be going to Washington to urge Obama to take action on the torture issue. They're saying Barack Obama should act from the moment of his inauguration to restore U.S. image battered by allegations of torturing terrorism suspects. They're planning to press their case with the president-elect's transition team in Washington. About a dozen retired generals and admirals expected to meet with his team, saying that they're going to offer a list of anti-torture principles, including some that could be implemented immediately. Matthew Alexander, do you know about this?
I've heard of this, and there's not just retired generals. There's people within the military who have stood up. There's people who stood up with me in Iraq and said no to torture and that they wouldn't do or participate in certain things. Colonel Steve Kleinman, who is probably the most senior officer we have in the military, who has been trained as an interrogator, has spoken before Congress several times. And his story is also told in Jane Meyer's book, The Dark Side, about how he was sent to Iraq to teach interrogators how to use Siri techniques.